Stats SA has announced that total formal employment decreased by 0.7% in the first quarter of this year and fell by 0.9% on a year-on-year basis. Data shows that jobs in the formal sector fell from 10.6 million in the last quarter of 2024 to 10.5 million in the first 3 months this year. According to the quarterly employment survey, the decrease at least was due to loss of jobs in the trade sector, which accounted for a fall of 2.2%. This was followed by job losses in community services, mining, business services, construction and electricity. The transport industry remained unchanged, while manufacturing sector added 2,000 jobs. On a quarterly basis, full-time employment decreased by 55,000 jobs, while on an annual basis, full-time employment decreased by 40,000. Part-time employment also decreased in a quarterly and annual basis. Gross earnings were up year-on-year by 2.7%, but fell on a quarterly accompanied by a fall in basic salaries, bonuses and overtime payments. For more now on this latest jobs data, I am joined by Xhanti Payi, Economist and Strategist from PwC. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Just to clarify, I'm no longer with PwC, but thanks for it's very good to speak to you.
Thank you for clarifying that. What economic factors contributed to the significant loss of jobs in Q1?
Well, clearly there's a number of factors if you look at the data and you try and analyze it. The first thing that you notice, of course, is those numbers, the big 54,000 that is down from the trade sector. And that's something that we usually expect in the first quarter, because remember, that's where you see, after that first festive period, after the last quarter, you usually tend to see a decrease in trade numbers. So that would be where you actually get it in stores. That's because of that peak period that you see during December. So you see that first, and that's a very important thing that is though expected. But then, of course, you see at the same time, construction, you see mining seeing a lot of suffering. But that is also looking at some of the conditions that are in the mining sector, including, of course, continued struggles in logistics, and there's continued also problems in demand globally, and then of course energy issues that continue to bedevil the sector. And then another thing that we also notice is really what we call community services. That's really some of the public sector stuff that you see, but also one of the issues that are also very important is to consider the households. So basically people who may be working in community services, that would be doctors, that would be domestic workers. So a number of those services that are required by communities or by households, that may be under a lot of pressure given the finances of these people.
Now, conversely, job increases in manufacturing have been reported. What do you think drove this increase?
Sorry, I didn't get that. I lost you there.
That's fine. Sorry. Conversely, job increases in manufacturing have been reported. What do you think drove this increase?
That's an interesting one, especially because manufacturing also tends to be quite under a lot of pressure. Although that in the first quarter, there's a sense there that there's a little bit of a recovery from the last time that we saw. So that's actually quite an important recovery that we were looking at, but also because of the long-term stress that sector has been under. So one can actually think about that. And that's one thing. But also what I think is also important is just which you mentioned between the permanent employment and part-time employment was also very important to look at, because it also looks that we've lost jobs both sides. So, earlier on I mentioned to you that we have job losses because of the temporary employment that you would have seen during that last quarter because of the festive season. But at the same time, if you look at the part-time employment, it also tells you, and the permanent employment, that the issue is also a little bit more widespread, because if you lose permanent employment, it shows some weakness in the economy. So one would have to look at that and say that clearly the problem is a little bit more stabilized, and actually that's actually more entrenched the problem rather than just a temporary issue that we are facing.
Xhanti, what role do global economic conditions such as trade dynamics or commodity prices play in shaping South Africa's employment landscape, particularly in the manufacturing and transport sectors?
That's a very, very key role One of the areas, of course, that we see that is in the mining sector, because we know that the mining sector is an international sector in terms of actually our ability to export. That usually tells us that, a global economy that's slightly weaker. And we know that we have had some weaknesses in terms of our trade partners economically. When you think about, the US, certainly, China has also had some weakness. And so those commodity prices being lower, so that demand globally has been lower. And that has been reflected really in a lot of discussions that are coming out of the international financial organizations that are telling us that this year is slightly weaker. So that is still part of that discussion.
And how do you see the employment trends observed in Q1 impact South Africa's economic growth, consumer spending, as well as social stability in the short to medium term?
Look, this is a very, very important number because it tells us that, we're probably likely to see a weaker first quarter because of the same thing as you say, because, we tend to see this relationship between employment and growth. And that actually, as we less employ people, it tells you that, the growth outlook itself is not positive, because obviously you need to be employing people to tell you that actually we are actually seeing growth. Remember, organizations tend to hire more people as they try to grow the different sectors. So we find that as a stable thing. So certainly across sectors, if you're seeing employment lowering, then it's telling you that the economy itself is struggling because people are not being employed to participate in production, to support, say, households, and to be able to support businesses. So that is really telling us that we are really facing a weak economy, and one that is actually continuing to weaken if we think about the quarter that we've just about to close, which has had a lot of tailwinds, both in terms of local issues and international issues, including some of those challenges we've seen in the US in terms of their policies on trade and other issues.
I agree with you there. Q2 numbers are going to be very, very interesting, especially considering what has happened around the world. Thank you so much. That was Xhanti Payi, economist and strategist, chatting to us about those latest job numbers today.